All right. They don't know what to say. And I bust out sarcasm. All right, we're gonna get started in just a moment. Streaming and everything. Streamers can get on and complain and stuff like that.
Let's just slap this out, but anybody that hasn't read yet, just in case, if you haven't submitted a project one link, even if you're submitted, please submit one now.
Yes, submit your project one links or whatever. I don't know what the consequence is of failure, I guess, right?
Yeah, you just won't get graded.
You are a failure if you forget to do that. So, don't do it. Okay. So, let's just do a quick pulse check. Fist 5, how are we feeling about Node so far? Yeah, okay, okay. We got some okay numbers. We got some ones in there, okay. Well, we're going to work on that. We're going to fix that today. We're going to start with a refresher to make things easy, you know. We're going to do activity number 10. We're going to work with the command line again, just parse some command line arguments. Stephanie, if you're not grading anything, if you want to help me walk around so we can answer any questions that anyone's got on the Node stuff. While we were, is Chris down there? Oh. Nor, of course, went upstairs. Leave it to Nor. Anyway, if you have questions, now's the chance to ask. Pop back up.
Yes. I was lost last Saturday. I mean, I understand a server product and whatnot, but where I got lost, yes, I can explain to you. Not only should you not use it, probably because my terminal was working. It wasn't response. So hold on for a minute. I was not getting. I'm not saying I'm just saying it's scientist. I'm just what I'm saying.
You're going to have to be able to send your through that trust.
Okay, so the README says blank JavaScript. Hey, it's Nord. Hey, Nord. Okay.
Previous class you showed that you got trigger qualities on this.
Well, I find them more than
It did work, but the error was
yeah,
there.
the error is not This is working as well. So okay, that I understand.
So you go back to the instructions.
And then I was like, no, and word for word with code.
Yeah, if you look at the screen first thing. That's weird. Well, look at any other screen. There's a pen.
Don't need to separate signs. We're all here together. Try to do this one then. See how far you can get on there. And let me have 2 minutes. It's just a journal bothering you.
Yeah, I realized that after.
Did the doors actually lock?
That's it.
Yeah.
Like, oh, shit. You got a question?
At least the right door. I didn't check the left door.
Yep. What is this one? So when I use that one, I got the.
That's what I think there's like variables. You want me to sit over there?
I use.
That's what I thought. I don't think that
I know this one works.
Yeah.
So that one,
It's program.
this one is the one you know works. What's the difference between the two? There's one key difference. This one was for exporting the MyVans objects explicitly, right? This one is exporting an object with a property called MyVans. The same thing as what you had, yes. But what does that mean? When you import that object, you don't have MyVans. You have an object that has MyVans, right? So if you do it that way, it's currently uncommented, you have to pull MyVans off of the import. So now,
Oh, did you really? I knew they had much trouble with it.
Oh, you're talking about
so this van list, to get the van list out, you actually have to van list not my vans.
Okay.
So you just have to
you'd have to do it here, van list not my vans, or you have to do it right here off of the required thing. So right after that last parenthesis before the semicolon,
So like here, I can do that.
yeah, you do my vans, not my vans. But it still won't work. Because look,
Oh, yeah.
wow, I'm just saying.
or you can pull it out as a single variable, right? Probably, there's probably no reference.
It's another one. All right, but yeah, now I got it.
Get it? Yeah, that's the confusing thing about it. I was trying to make it clear, but obviously it's kind of hard to do.
That screwed your mom, but it was spinning because the plate piece of the supposed to be attached.
Got it, Norm?
Unfortunately, we need to spell
What you meant to write?
I don't know. Don't ask the dyslexic. No idea.
Console log.
Nice. Good start. Start with the console log. Start with the simplest functionality to move out.
About 8 lines.
Sounds about right. About 8 lines.
For bonus also.
Yeah. You really want to be that guy?
Yeah, that's true. You can actually put this inside, so you can count this expression inside the console log, inside the console log. Spit out your code based on what you can. So yeah, it would be too long.
Yeah, that was
I'll buy this one, just leave that there. I'll pick it up.
A lot of things have to do with that.
Yes, yeah, sure.
How was your dinner, by the way?
Oh, it's good. Louis the Glassman. You're in class. Yeah. We've been around
Yeah, when I got really don't need to use so nice. Then it was inside that, it was talking in any direction.
As a remainder of the set.
Percent 7.
Oh, what's that?
So it means the remainder is 0. Not 7. The first one's the second one's also by 7. Also take inside the
Make it really smart. Like to all purple. Yeah.
It's more readable, yeah. It makes it easier for what's going on. Otherwise,
Someone go to the Alright, let me pull up the code and let's go over it. Okay, so remember, we need to parse the command line arguments. So just quickly, we're going to go over it so we can go into the meat of the lesson today. Remember, we have the process argv array that we get every time you run a node script, a node process. And from that, you always skip argument 0 and argument 1, the first and the second index in that array, right? Because the first one is node, yeah, nice. And the second one is the script you're running. So the third one and the fourth one would be your arguments if you had 2 arguments, right? So what we wanted to do was basically compare the arguments and determine if they're the same. And we use our triple equality there with arg1 and arg2. You can see right here, we use our triple equality. Why? Someone? Jesse, why do we use the triple equality?
So it's exact.
So it's exact, yes. I think Garrett yelled that out too, but I ignored him. And then, if you want to do the bonus had a neat trick to it. So basically the idea was, could you find out if the arguments being passed in were divisible by 7? So if we remember from Saturday, when the arguments come in on the command line, they're always strings. So theoretically, you have to convert it to a number, right? So you could do parsint if you wanted and then divide it by 7, or do the modulo. But if you do the modulo right here, like this, modulo 7, modulus, whatever you call it, it actually does an implicit type conversion to convert it to a number if possible. If it's not a number, then this will not equal 0. If it's a number other than something divisible by 7, this will not equal 0. And if it's a number divisible by 7, then it'll equal 0, and we passed. Now, if both of them are divisible by 7, then we can log true. Otherwise, we'll log false. Any questions on this example? This was like our refresher to get us back into things. So if you have questions, feel free to ask before we start moving on, because we're going to start talking about some more advanced stuff in Node today. Did you have a question, Nor? No? Okay. I'll leave that up for just a moment while I pull up the next exercise. Why is that one not? That's weird. Alright, hold on a sec. I'll bring it back. Hold on. So if I just cut people off, sorry. There you go. All right. Okay. If you are not done with that example, I'll put the solution up tonight. So, Node. Node's pretty cool. We've been playing with it a little bit, but we've really only just done basic JavaScript stuff with Node so far. So we saw how JavaScript still exists, and a lot of the things we do with JavaScript still exist with Node. But why is Node so special? What else can we do? Well, for one, it's running on your machine, which is pretty awesome. So that means you can do a whole bunch of stuff with Node that you can't do from the browser. For instance, you can create files and manipulate files. You can talk to your operating system. You can, you know, transmit information over all kinds of protocols. I mean, there's a ton of stuff you could do. So we're going to get into writing and reading files today, which is a pretty fun thing to do, right? And that gets you really into the operating system and really, like, this is some lower level programming we're starting here. So it's pretty fun. So if we remember from Saturday, one of the things we did at the end of class was the import-export syntax, right? So we had the module exports, and then you had that require. Well, require is used pretty universally in Node, pretty much to bring in any package. So anything that's exported. It could be your own file that you created with an export, module export, or it could be a package you downloaded to use with Node, or it could be a built-in package with Node. Node has quite a few of these built-in packages that we can use, and one of them is called FS for file system, right? So a couple things about this syntax. One, you'll note that when I am requiring a file, I'll usually have some relative path towards the file, right? So I'll have a dot slash or a dot slash or a dot slash some folder, some file. But with the packages, you just reference the package name. So in this case, the package name is FS. We just require FS, and Node knows magically what to do. The other thing is I'm assigning it to what? A variable, right? Because when we import something with that require statement, we get back an object. Most of the time. There's some exceptions, but generally you can assume you're going to get back some sort of an object. And you got to store it in a variable. So in this case, it's best practice just to name the variable after the package. So I just called the variable FS, so we know that that's the FS module. So what can we do with FS? We can do a whole lot of things, and I'll show you how you can figure that out in just a moment. But one of them that we can do off the top of my head, or that's right here in the directions, is write a file. And you can see actually Visual Studio Code's pretty cool because there's this autocomplete. So I can cheat and just do dot, and you can see all of the different functions that FS has on it already. And so there's a ton of stuff you can do. But we're going to do write file. Write file takes in 3 parameters, as you can see right here, this crazy thing that pops up. It takes a path, which is either going to be in a string, number, buffer, or URL format. It takes in some data, which is what you're writing to the file. And it takes in potentially some options, which we're ignoring in this example, and then it takes in a callback. So we're going to use this example, which has the path, the data, and the callback. And we're familiar with all of these things. We're familiar with strings. We're familiar with objects or data, really. Data can be anything in this case. And we're familiar with callbacks because we've done click handlers and other types of handlers, right? So what's the path? The path is a relative path to your directory. So if we were to do this together, right now I'm here in this write file directory, right? If I want to create a file in this directory, I just need to specify the file name. So let's do movies.txt. It's going to create a text file called movies. Now the next parameter is the content, right? So I'm going to list some movies. Forrest Gump, Interstellar. Right? We got some awesome movies there. And the last one we care about is the callback. This signature is kind of hard to read. You'll get it more later, but just know that most of the callbacks in Node, their first parameter is going to be an error of some sort. So we just have a callback with one parameter error, and we've effectively written a function to write a file. And why don't we go ahead and test it? If I go ahead and do node, and I open up the file directory, I now have a movies.txt folder, or file, with Jaws, Forrest Gump, and Interstellar. Any questions on what we've just seen with that? Yep. Yes, so FS is a package that comes with Node. So when you install Node, it's just there. We have FS. There's quite a few of them, but FS is one you'll use more often. Where does the package live? That's a great question. Right, okay, so where does the package live? Well, technically, we'll get into that a little bit later at the end of class of where packages you install live, because they live in different places. When you install Node.js, there's these special system packages that exist with the executable, basically. So there's a Node.exe somewhere on your machine. If you use MVM, it's in a different place. If you just installed it on Windows, it's like in your program files. If you installed it on Mac, it's in probably your user local or your user bin or something. And with that, there's linkage through the executable to basically these defined packages that are somewhere. Either they're part of the exe or they're just somewhere else on the machine that it knows, some well-defined path where they're installed. So this one's a little tricky because they just come from the ether. Node knows where they are when they're installed, and that's just where they are. Can you find the source code? No, it's written in C++. You can go find it if you want to inspect the V8 source code, but I don't recommend it. Not yet, at least. But what was that? Yeah, the FS package. So other packages that we install, we'll see because they actually get put in your directory. So we'll see that in a little bit with the npm. But these system ones, they're just installed on your machine. Okay, so a couple of things about this write file function. This callback. This callback's pretty special because until that callback is invoked, there's no way for us to know that the file's been written or not. So the only way we can guarantee that this action is completed is inside of this function callback, right? So one thing we can do quickly is if error. So if there's an error, so remember our truthiness, right? When I'm doing if error, what is that saying? If it exists, which means if it is not equal to null or undefined. Because error is an object. So if error comes in as null or undefined, there was no error. If it comes in as anything else, there was an error, so you should just assume that something bad happened. So we can do return console.log and then just print the error if something bad happens. Otherwise, the file is written. We can say the file is written, right? So why don't we go ahead and see what happens when I run it again. The file content's not going to change at all, but we see it says the file is written. This is called after the file has been created. Now, if we want to see what will happen when we have an error, if I just create append a random directory. So remember, I said this is a relative path. So in my folder I'm in right now, if I do test/movies.txt, it's going to look for a test folder, and in that folder, it's going to write a movies.txt file. With write file, the default operation basically says if the folder doesn't exist, I'm going to error out. It's not going to create the folder for you. That's not what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to write a file. So we can see what will happen. We get this thing. This is the error that was console logged out. Okay? It's pretty helpful too. enoent, no such file or directory. Basically, you can't enter the file directory. You can't find it, right? Because it was trying to get into movie test/movies.txt. So the first thing it does is it looks for that folder. It's like, I can't find it. That sucks. And then it gives you an error number, some error information, right? So it tells you a little bit about it. As you get more used to seeing this stuff, you'll know what it means. Oh, the directory didn't exist. I need to check first. Yeah, Garrett?
Well, that's not if you give it like a crappy file extension, like let's say you took a T out the TXT, like a Dan, you still be in here.
That is a really good question. I don't. I don't because now I have a new file, movies.tx. So that is a good question because what is a file extension? A file extension is whatever you want. It has no bearing on the data in the file whatsoever. They're just a common identifier that people use. But they mean nothing. I could call anything a .txt, anything a .json, anything a .csv, anything a .mdf, doesn't matter. They're just generally standardized across certain formats, right? So that's a really great question. I actually don't even need a file extension because a valid file is just something that's effectively not a directory or a socket. So if I do this, I'll have a movies file with the same content.
Question.
Yes?
Return console log the error. Without return,
Ah, that's a good question too. Return console log error. Without the return, would it work? Yes, it would work fine. Let me show you. I could also do this. These two are functionally equivalent with the return after the console log, and I get the same thing. Now, let me show you why the return is there. It's telling me the file is written, but there was an error. So if I had important processing logic after that error check, it would still try to happen. And if there was something requiring the file to exist, well, I'm going to get more errors. So that was just a safeguard. Actually, that was a great question. But this is a really good practice right here. It's basically you should fail fast. This is kind of the methodology. If you have a problem and you can't continue, just leave. Right? Leave the function. Tell me anything I need to know, and then just bail.
Like a break in the switch.
Yeah, kind of like the break in the switch. Yeah, very similar. Cool. So, there's another thing about write file, and that is write file only writes files. And when I say that, I mean I have my movies.txt, right, which has Jaws, Forrest Gump, and Interstellar in it. Let's go ahead and not do that. Change this to Hello Kitty. Favorite movie. No, I'm just kidding. That's weird. Sorry if it's your favorite movie and I just offended you. Open up movies.txt. Now says Hello Kitty. Jaws, Interstellar, and Forrest Gump are gone. They've been blown away. Because write file does just that. It just writes to a file. It does not care what you have in there. That's not its job. It's a bulldozer. It's coming to destroy you. So be careful about write file, because it just does that. Writes to a file. Yeah?
So write file will always overwrite.
Write file, there are other things you should use. So that depends. Write file will always overwrite in this scenario. There are technically file write options you can give it to avoid that, but the way we go about and do that in Node is we use a different function altogether that we'll get to later. So that's a yes and no question, but for Node's purposes, yes, it always will overwrite file. Yeah, Adam?
We're worried about Peyton.
Oh, Peyton's here. I let him in. Okay, any questions on this write file that we're looking at right now? Any questions at all?
No.
Yeah,
So
you have a
if
question?
like write file over like something important, is it just gone?
Yep.
Like,
You can't get it back. Don't do it. So do not write file over your system32 user 32.dll. That'd be a really bad idea.
Can you actually do that?
No, the system will stop you because you're not you won't be an owner, but you can do some pretty nasty stuff. Yeah, funny story. So I was messing around with some command line tools a long time ago, and I didn't really know what I was doing. And I accidentally executed the command too early because I was trying to. You can take your Windows 32 drive and you can symlink it onto a separate drive so that you can store all that system stuff on a larger drive. And instead of doing the symlink, I accidentally did force delete. And it doesn't delete everything, but it deleted enough that I could not use my machine anymore. I couldn't open the Windows Firewall tools. I couldn't install anything. I couldn't uninstall anything. I could log in, and I could pretty much sit there. It was interesting. So don't do that. How did I fix it? I reinstalled Windows. Yep. I couldn't restore Windows. It was like, no, I don't know what you're doing.
That's why you should always put your code up in GitHub.
That's why you should not run a force delete on your Windows file or Windows folder directory. That one's probably not. Yeah, your computer could fail anytime, and thankfully, if I had anything on there, it didn't matter because I had to overwrite it anyway. So, don't do that. Okay, so I have a tough question for you all. I want to see if anyone can answer it. We have this function called write file. What is the function called to read a file? Read file. Oh, wow, you guys are good. Good job. So, when we want to read a file, look at that, read file. Nice. That's pretty cool. So read file is slightly different. It also takes 3 parameters. The first one being the file name. This is a relative file path again. So I'm in my directory. I have a movies.txt file that's in this directory. So I know I can call read file on it because I know it exists. The second parameter is not Hello Kitty. It is the encoding, which just keep it a UTF-8 for now. So all strings in programming have a special encoding type. UTF-8's the most basic one. Just keep it at that. It's not the most basic, but it's a pretty basic one. And then the third one is, again, a callback. This callback is slightly different. So the first parameter that comes in is also an error, just like write file, but the second one is data. And data comes in based off of your encoding. And in this case, since our coding is UTF-8, the data will come in as a UTF-8 string, which means we'll be reading that file as the string, as the text we put in there. So if I go right here, replace this with data, come back here again. Let's clear this. And I run it, I get Hello Kitty. Just for verification, if I go to my movies.txt, Hello Kitty. So, what happens if I try to read a file that doesn't exist? That looks really familiar, doesn't it? That's a pretty familiar looking error. So, write file, when it tries to go write a file that's in a directory that doesn't exist, it gets this error. And when we try to read a file that doesn't exist, we also get this error. So obviously write file is doing some reading of something when it's going to get a directory, a subdirectory. But anyway, we can now pretty much assume that this error means that file does not exist. And that's exactly what it means. So, very similar operation to read file. The important things, again, 3 parameters for both of them. The first one is the name of the file. The second one on write file is the content. The second one on read files, the encoding type. And the third one's always your callback. Callback starts with an error. First parameter is an error. And then if you have any data at all, write file does not, but read file does. Any other function that has a callback too, if it has any data, it's going to be the second parameter. We'll see that a little later too. So read file. Read file is pretty cool. Anyone have any questions on this? Yeah, Matt?
What was the UTF-8 stand for again?
It stands for UTF-8 encoding.
Oh, I mean, like, what was the... Because you said it was specific. You had to write a certain file name like that. I remember.
Yeah, so we might not actually need it. Yeah, so that's what you get if you don't have UTF-8. You get buffer 48, 65, 60, 60, 6F, 20, 4B, so on and so forth. So what UTF-8 is it's the encoding type of the data coming out of the file. So basically you're saying this file that I'm going to read, it is text. That's what I'm saying with UTF-8. It's text with a certain character limit. So there's no Chinese characters in there with UTF-8. But there's pretty much all the English characters and some other fancy ones too, and like smiley faces and shit. So that's what's in UTF-8, right? So it's just basically saying that this is our basic text. All of your HTTP requests that have JSON and all the JavaScript and HTML files, they're all UTF-8 by default.
Whenever I want to read a file, I want to put UTF-8 in there so I don't get that craziness buffer down there.
Pretty much, unless you want the raw buffer. If you want the raw buffer because you want to do binary manipulation, you can. But usually when we're reading a file, we don't. So, yes, you want the UTF-8. Yeah, Garrett? Could I make a JSON object in here? Okay, like with write file or something? You want me to write a JSON string to? Yeah. Alright, so let's have JSON, test.json, right? My JSON. Aid. So, I want to write, let me comment this out. I want to write JSON. We have a fancy function called json.stringify that we can use. So if there's an error, we'll do something. Otherwise, we're just going to do console.log JSON exists, right? So let's go ahead and run this. Boom, JSON exists. And if I do my test JSON, we have a JSON file. So I like that exercise because when we are making HTTP requests to an API and they return JSON, this is effectively what's happening on the server side. It's taking a JavaScript object, if it's Node, it's doing JSON stringify and is whoop, sending it back to you. So instead of putting it in a file, writing it to a file, you can imagine it's writing back to the client with a response, right? It's very, very similar how that works. So yeah. And if you want to be really fancy and you want to show you the power of JavaScript here, there's our JSON. And it's in object form in JavaScript. It's pretty sweet, huh? No problem. Any other questions on this stuff before we, I'm going to show you something real quick before we get to an exercise. But any questions on this before we move on? Cool. Okay, so how in God's name do I know everything that these Node APIs can do? Yes, resources. There is a basically an API doc that comes with every version of Node.js. So I'm back at the LTS version, right? Since we're all supposed to be using the LTS right now, which is version 8.12.0. And you can see all of the different packages that you can access. In this case, we were using file system, and you can see if you see the URL down at the bottom left, there's fs.html. I go ahead and open this bad boy up. These are all the different things you can do with the file system package. So for instance, we were just doing a read file. When we find read file, click on read file, and you can see everything you can do with this function, right? So takes in a path, that's the first one. Anything that's in those brackets, those array-like brackets, is called optional. It's an optional parameter. So you do not need the options parameter to call read file, but you can use it. And as a matter of fact, it tells you what they're made of. So remember, the path can be a string, buffer, URL, or an integer. The options can be a string, which is that encoding that I was using, UTF-8, or it could be an object that has an encoding flag, which you can set to UTF-8, and it also has a flag for the read type. So this is where you can be like, I want to read as binary, I want to, you know, read special way, or, you know, read with administrative privileges or whatever, right? And then there's the callback, which is a function that has two parameters, error and data. And data comes in as either a string or a buffer, depending on your encoding. So again, if our encoding is UTF-8, we're going to get the string. If our encoding is nothing or something weird, we're probably going to get a buffer. Sometimes you want the buffer, and you don't want the string. So then you just don't want to set an encoding, right? But the point is, if you want to see what methods exist in these built-in packages for Node, there's an easy way to find it, and that is to go just Google Node.js API docs. That's always what I do, because I can never remember the exact link. Node.js API docs. Takes me to the latest version, and then you just find the version you want. Usually there's not too big of a difference between the major versions on most of this stuff, but there's enough that you want to be careful, and you want to use the same major version that you're working with. So in this case, we have version 8. We want to look at the version 8 docs. So it also gives you examples of how to use it. Asynchronously reads the entire contents of a file. Here's an example. So here's just a simple example. Reads etc password, and then there's an error, and console log, right? So you'd get a buffer back from that one because there's no encoding. This one has the encoding, so it tells you a little bit about them. It tells you a little bit about how they could potentially be different, and all that kind of fun stuff. The kinds of errors that are thrown. So these are really powerful documents right here, and they're really, really good and really helpful for making your way around Node. They probably seem pretty confusing right now because Node's still very new, and how all this stuff reads is very new. And like, what's a buffer? Does anyone in here know what a buffer is, aside from Jesse? So a buffer is basically just, you can think of it simplistically as like an array, but usually it holds binary data, right? So if you want to work with the raw binary data of a file, you use a buffer. So there's all kinds of stuff you can do with the file system.
What is throw?
Throw. That's a good question. So when you have an error, say I don't want to console log it, I can do, say, throw error, and what it does is it immediately halts execution and crashes the program. Basically.
So it's like return to console log.
It is more than that. It's a lot. The simplistic view is, yeah, it's kind of return console log. It's more like, tell the application, we are done. It is over, you are dead, and kill it. And then we get this message in the console usually, but it has more than just, it has more than just, like the console log. It was kind of a nice format. If I run this, it's going to be crazy. No, this one's not so bad, because there's only one function. But it has this thing called the stack trace. So it tells me a little bit about where this was thrown, tells me what file and what line it was thrown, tells me the error. But if you're deep in the functions, you'll get this thing called the stack trace, which is a big printing of all the functions that were involved in this. And so if you're 10 functions deep, you'll see a listing of all the functions from where you started. So it does a little bit more, and there's more to it under the covers. But yeah, it's kind of like let's just stop. But the thing is, a return will stop the function you're in. A throw will stop them all. Unless you know how to properly handle them, it'll just stop the whole thing. So it's like a panic. Panic the application away. So one of the cool things about Node, because those docs are so powerful, it's pretty easy to find stuff and pretty easy to be a little bit more, how should I say, independent of when you're learning new things. Not saying that we're not going to help you in the class, but I'm just saying when you're going and implementing new functionality yourself on your projects and stuff like that, there's a really nice set of documentation to help you get started with Node. So that's really great. And that's not always present with some of the web-based stuff. And like jQuery's docs are terrible. They're there, but they're just so bad to read. Nodes are pretty good. So what's another resource, which you guys might have been using already? That's Stack Overflow. So Stack Overflow is a good place to go when you have any questions. Now, what I recommend is you should first definitely always search your questions very thoroughly. Stack Overflow, I'll just tell you, is notoriously beginner unfriendly because they expect you to have read all of the documentation on Stack Overflow and understand all the rules of contributing and how everything works. So if you ask a question that someone else has asked or something, you'll probably get downvoted into oblivion. So just don't do that. So say we have a question on how to read a file in Node. So, okay, how to read a file in blocks with Node. Just say we're going with that. And then you can find a question, and kind of usually someone will post some sort of a code example. All that stuff. Is everyone kind of familiar with Stack Overflow? Has anyone used it in class yet? Most people? Okay. Stack Overflow is a pretty great resource, as you probably know then. So I recommend you continue to use it, and the presence with Node and Stack Overflow is pretty large, so most of your questions you'll find an answer to. Now that one was pretty ambiguous, and it was also one that's very easily answered elsewhere, so it's probably why we didn't find it so easily. Read file Node. Yeah, I don't know why the what does the yield keyword come up first. There you go. Here's one. How do I read a file in Node? And then they'll tell you, you're doing this stuff wrong or whatever. So anyway, Stack Overflow, great resource, right? Any questions on the read file, write file stuff before we move on, and how it works in Node? No questions? Cool. I want you to work with a partner then on activity number 13, the best things ever. You're going to create a node application that reads the bestthingsEver.txt file, parses the comma-separated elements, and ultimately console logs each element in the file on separate lines. So basically you'll have a file, you're going to read it, you're going to have to split it somehow into a bunch of different strings, and then you have to write all of them to the console. Okay? So that's activity 13. Work with a partner. Definitely work with a partner or work with your table to get this done. And we'll talk about it in like 15 minutes. Yeah, Jesse?
Got a question on the code over there. For some reason.
Okay, 1 second. Well, okay. So we don't work because we're supposed to voice thing, but right. So those are the what? Indexes the red for it is a
Oh, it's speaking of the
Person we're gonna do is make a JavaScript file, right? Yep. My last exercise, working on the basically oh, you're gonna copy all of it?
yeah. So unfortunately, that's
Yeah, I should have just copied it.
yeah. One place you can work.
Read file.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I think so, yeah. Yeah. I think we just read this, there's just like, it's like a best things ever. For the read, we need the function error and the function data, right? The error, I guess, is obviously the error with the data is what's inside the file. I think. Yeah, you gotta make the second parameter or whatever, and then the first function error, you're gonna do function error, comma data.
Split.
Like, in the function in this one, you gotta have the data as the callback. Yeah, because the error is where it stores, like, it doesn't go through it, so I guess like you're doing like an error, exists, I guess.
Yeah. So that we make sure this goes out. Well, we're not going to need cross-part B for this one. So we have the file.
No, technically that data should have everything inside the file.
So now you can get the FFmpeg file.
Oh, no.
So you just try to spit out. It's gonna look like you look at that. Separated into various lumps. So.
I think we're missing a parentheses. They would just be one point more.
Oh, so you do data dot split.
And how hard you split them.
So now, technically, if you console log the data, it'll have all the things that were on everything
Oh, I put it
inside
within
that
the
file.
You put it within your function.
Okay, so do console log the data.
Yeah, after you've done this, you put the split in your function.
So basically, inside that callback function, you're putting, you're saying in this callback function, right, you're already using errors.
Playing with it to see how I
And you're gonna do data dot
modify
split.
what they want us.
So basically, you won't do it separately. Because data doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So what you're gonna do is you are gonna create a variable, you're gonna create a container for that data that's coming in.
I think technically, console,
I would do like data.
console log data, and then if you run the node application, run the node,
Now data dot split, right, so what you're doing is, you gotta think of data as an array.
Yes.
This data that's coming in, what's here? Yeah, it's an array.
I think this is one is to separate it line by line after the comma.
And data dot
Something like that.
ongoing magic split at every time. So it's an array. Now you get this container of all these individual, bits of data coming out of that array. Alright, and then
It's okay if you've not spaced it.
yeah. So what would you normally do with an array?
Right. Because I feel like God's speaking right now.
Parse the data, right?
You're gonna access them using the.
So you have an array and you want to clear out each element, what would you do? You have an array and you want to print out each element, what would you do?
I just looked up how to replace a new line, or how to replace a comma with a new line.
Right, how would you get something to automatically happen? No.
Okay, now
Read it. Oh, read file, right?
You have an array, right?
So
So it's gonna wanna read everything from the array. But you wanna read it one thing at a time. What if we got to
The result is that array is gonna be basically an array of
Rita's,
that strings a real set or on either side of the space. So like the zero element in the array will be how element 1 will be R, element 2 will be U. Makes sense?
Oh, yeah.
So then, once you have that in a result, it's in an array form, then you just import it.
So it's reading.
So what are the
Like saying, I'm gonna read it until there's a space, and I'm gonna store that, and then I'm gonna read it until there's a space, and I'm gonna store that as a chunk. So it's basically just splitting that whole thing up by
Yeah,
rows
you're
and
gonna
just shoving it into an array.
that data array.
So you can
put these things go to.
Yeah, so that's what you're building. Right, so let's go to your example again. So,
No, so
can be fast type.
This is a more sophisticated tool. What's the reference impact?
Yep.
just drop that something called breakup, right? Since everything in that file split up by commas. So we're just gonna give them the letter assignments for now.
Oh, there's
So what split does is if I say I want a variable
Console log, why don't you console log data
that's equal to data
and see what it is?
dot split.
Remember, you're gonna do it after the zero check.
So this will be an array where 0 in that array is equal to x, 1 in the array is equal to y, right? It just basically goes through and removes these and puts them in an array. So once you have this, the rest you can do where I, you know how to do that.
Well, see, in and of have to do with
On result. And your tennis console log, I.
In my array.
So now that's that, so now you're showing a console log. No, you
Yeah.
can maybe just have it.
So I guess what I think that maybe we confused on earlier is like, when you're reading from the file, that file is like all around different files.
Well, is that true? When the data is being scoped, this variable is being scoped to the rest of it.
We want the,
Or do you want to keep that set all as part back to back?
So, how do you do that?
The split side, right?
Nope.
no, you have to use
Did you say what line was on working?
I'm gonna put something inside that.
File.
Okay, yeah, so I want to explain to you,
Where are you running from?
maybe we confuse you right here, but what's happening here is you're actually, right here, you're putting the file. You're reading the best things ever. So best things ever is what they call a comma separated values file. Not even it's not even comma separated values.
Oh,
It's a
oh,
.txt,
okay, so I
but
think
it's set
it's
up as comma separated values.
on the
So
stall.
what you're doing is you're reading that file,
I didn't know
and
this was-
whenever those values are coming in, data.split creates a new array where each element of the array is
Oh, wait, no, no.
whatever came before the most recent column, right? So like you read left to right, there's five words in a sentence, and then there's a comma. That one becomes one element, and then whatever's after that or before the next comma becomes another element in the array, right? So now you have this new array, and it's called data array, right? And what you're doing is you're looping over that array, and each time you loop over the array,
I don't really fully
the
remember how to
data
do
array
it.
okay. So you're consoling the index of the data array.
Yeah. So is this
Or
all
like console one, man.
That's it. If you say no, then on that file, it's right here.
I would use it to remember it.
Sorry to adopt this, it's gonna be anyway.
Oh, wait, no, it's one.
It's wrapped in chalk there in HTML tags.
So you want to CD into us?
Yeah, you just give it a function, and in your case, you can just declare, you can do a non-functionated and main function, but you can just do the same thing, do function, and then, or you can do a chain.
Oh, wait. Let's go ahead and. You both know that on our script. Okay, yeah.
You know, like,
You know, like, you give it an input. You need to give the function an input.
awesome? Thank you.
Typically, the way it helps me to remember it, yeah, try it that way.
Yeah.
oh, yeah.
You just console log it twice.
So then wouldn't everyone just like exist in there too, or? What it does is.
I mean,
Like everything is Node.
Yeah.
This is Node. Yeah, so what this means is, the way I do it, I sort of try to name the variables so it makes more sense to me. If you call this results and make it plural, then you can say results for each. Call this function with a single result.
so this guy has a
And that in my brain always, and it's that way in C
cool, yeah, and he filled water, and this was like 5 years ago, and he still hasn't got a job yet, so he's like, where's the data?
So, let's see, yeah, you're just console logging the results and then you're typing the data.
That's what I thought.
What you want to do is store the length of rows on your array. You want to console log the length of time.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, so
So that's just another way to.
yeah. Well then,
There you go. Well, that worked. So now you can see it as a single file and.
So you have to put on this to this.
Yeah, you have to give it what you're splitting by.
So if it were no common spaces, you want to focus without that.
Yeah, you can take whatever you're splitting a string by can be in your own patch. If you did, the only bad thing about this example is when you do it by spaces, it lays it in the word or the wheel or something, right? You would split right through this. Yeah, that's why they have to do it in this.
Yeah.
I did mine on the standard except instead of 4 loop, I was trying to do that before we get to credit thing. But it's like the same as the 4 loop, except it's just like
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like.
4 each console log.
But I think it was only like making an array.
Yeah, data is already like stuff. Okay.
So it's pretty much.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna go over this one together. All right. So, fist of 5. How was that exercise for everyone? We have some 5s, some 3s, numbers all over the board. Okay. Yeah, that was a tough one. This is our first like real experience with Node. We did some command line stuff, but now we're getting into packages and all kinds of other functions. So, what was the point of this exercise? Well, we have this bestthingsEver.txt file, and there's some content in there. Oop, this content. Just some text, comma, delimited. Which is pretty nice. Nice and easy, right? So what are we going to do? Well, the first thing we need to do, since our objective is to read the file, is we need to read the file, right? And before we can do that, we need to get the fs package so we can even access the read file function. So we make a variable var fs. We require the fs package. Remember, it's just the name of the package, so that's what we do. So now we have to read the file. What is the function I'm going to call? Peyton?
Read file.
Read file, nice. And the name of the file is bestthingsEver.txt, right? Matt, what's the encoding I'm going to use?
Oh, UTF-8.
UTF-8, nice. And Nor, how do I write the callback function? Function error slash comma data. Nice. Cool. So now we're reading the file. So they say. So I go into unsolved to make sure I'm in the right directory, and then I do node index.js. Nothing happens. Why has nothing happened? I'm not exactly. I haven't told him to do anything. So first things first, we always want to be safe and check to see if error exists. If it does, just go ahead and console log it and get out and be done. Right? That's just what we're going to do. Next, we'll just start simple and we'll just console log the data, right? So if I go ahead and run it, I get my, don't mind those characters, I get the text right there, you can see at the bottom. Cool. So now what do we got to do? Now we have to take that text, we have to chunk it up, right? Split it into individual lines, somehow get it into an array, so then we can loop over them with a for loop and print them individually. So we can use what function, Rolando? Data.split. Right, and split by the comma. So data is a string. All strings have a split function like they did in the browser. We can go ahead and call that, and what it's going to do is look for every instance of the comma, and when it finds it, it's going to put that in a new index of an array. So for every string separated by a comma, they're going to be in a different index of an array. So we're going to have, I don't know, 5 or 6 indexes in this one. So now what we got to do is a for loop. Right? And then we can console.log parts I. If I run this, not clear. I'm still console logging the first line, and then after that, I'm console logging them all individually. So, we know about for loops. We've done them for a while now. They're okay. But we can make this a little bit easier on ourselves. We can use this cool for each loop that we were seeing on Saturday. So there's 2 forms of it. There's var variable name of an array and var variable name in an array. If you want the value of the array, you use of. If you want the index, you would do in. So if I console.log str, I should get the same thing. Now, if I make the mistake of accidentally using in, I'll just show you really quick. I get the array indexes, and that's sad. No one wants that. Granted, I can use those to get the values in the array, right? So I wanted to show you that. Different ways we can use for each loops to go over arrays. Yeah, Matt?
So the of will give you the actual lines that you want, and then the in will just give you the still lines of
the of gives you the actual content, the in gives you the index of the array. The index of the content in the array. What was that?
You put a space in your comma after split?
Space in my comma after split? Oh, yeah. I see. Particular you are. I could do that, or what else could I do?
Trim.
If you're particular like Rolando and need it to be perfect. Any questions on this exercise? Cool. Okay. Take a break. Come back at let's do 7:45.
I didn't think it got trim. That's a good one.
Trim, yeah. That's generally the way because you don't know if it's going to start with the comma space or what.
Right.
So if you delimit off of it, you might miss some.
Yeah. That's my preference. There's like a dot replace comma with a new line at first.
I got this book. I didn't know if it was like any good though. So.
Oh, cool. There's a lot in here. So, I don't know, I've never read this one, but the content that's in here gets pretty sophisticated, so you got that going for you. So this will be, I mean, if you can manage to go through this for done with the course, you know a lot about Node. Seven 7:50-ish, probably good. That's 15 minutes. I don't know why. Dan's looking at the schedule because the schedule says we're supposed to finish that at 7:45.
Just make reference to it in your README file so you can feel like you don't get fucking
I'll
destroyed.
link them to it, man. That's
Yeah.
easy shit. Trying to make me do more work than I have to.
Okay.
So, like you were saying before, this is another version of a for loop.
Yes.
A more modern or more updated
More
version?
terse. So you can't do all the same stuff,
Oh, okay.
right? So you don't have an index, technically, in that one. So if you need to do something with the index, you can't. If you needed special conditions in your for loop, you can't. You know, like if you wanted to increment by 2 or something.
Okay. I understand that data split with a comma.
Good.
That's the way I see it, right?
Yeah, the data is split. Everywhere you see a comma, it takes a comma out and pushes the new content to something. Now, you're right.
Hardly
More like packages and stuff. Okay, I'll look at the curriculum.
We get a thumbs down.
What was that?
Yeah, hurt feelings.
Who got a thumbs down?
It'll be fine.
Everyone saw it.
Broke my spirit, man.
Oh, yeah.
What's up? What you got?
What was that? Oh yeah,
When I
like
said
gladiator, thumbs down.
Couldn't beat this guy.
Fuck you, class. I'm not coming in. You hurt my feelings.
Feelings hurt. End stream.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, it's Jerry off. It says I'm streaming now.
I messaged him. Today, I haven't had a chance to talk to him yet.
Well, you know, I have a full plate on him.
Yeah, you wanna make it happen.
I have a full plate, but then again, I don't have a social life, so that's why I'm here. I don't watch TV. I'm here. I mean, my social life is like, they're calling me, but when I got time,
Yeah.
you know, like,
Cool for school, Michael.
I am, yeah, exactly.
They said repair will take like 3 to 5 days or less. They can't. And then if I choose to not pay, they'll just send it back. Second grade. It's like one time. It would be like transition one that I'm on right now.
Probably G.I. Joe.
I really like that one. You put oxygen in the worst place. Yeah, I don't know. There's like cleaning up so many activities, links, and then you kind of can just like make it just and then just
It melts away the plastic screw.
Yep, you just go with this one because you gotta do
yeah, I don't really know like that, but like I feel like
My son, that's
yeah, exactly.
Isn't it designed to go inside the cabinet? What do you mean my cabinet's too hot?
Everything else is fine. It's definitely not like that. Does he want to drive tickets?
Is that
It wasn't near the EA test.
There's
is it a one you got from the
like an application called apply, and there's something so
They stopped arguing.
That's a lot of money. Yeah. Then we stopped using for that.
Yeah, I think it's, no, this one's good, I think it's good. Something that we heard it would be that.
My wife had a.
No, it's usually 10%. They try to schedule it for Saturday.
Oh, yeah.
They got rid of kind of made the Mac a Mac. Just to make it as possible.
Let's see.
Probably talk to like 50 or 70 people.
All right.
I really don't care.
Let's get back to it. Give you a moment to settle down, Nor. I know you gotta get all that energy out. I'm kidding. I kid. Okay. So, Fistify, how we feeling right now? On read file, write file, we've got a couple exercises, yeah?
Better than one.
Better than one, nice. We're moving on up. I like it. That's what I want to see. I want to get you to a 3 by the end of the day. So, we're going to do, we're going to learn about one more function before we move on from the file system stuff. So we talked about writing a file. Writing a file just blows everything away. It doesn't care. It doesn't care about you or your family. It just blows away the file. Read file is used to just get some stuff out of the file, right? So what if I have a file that has some content in it and I don't want to blow it away every time? Is there a way to do that? And the answer is yes. There's another function called append file. Nice. An append file has 3 parameters. You guessed it. The first one is the file name. The second one is the new text. I'll just call this new text. That is not even close. Sorry, it's hard to type when you're looking over here, okay, guys? And then the third one, again, is a function with 1 parameter for error. Because it's like write in the sense that it doesn't return anything. It just returns errors. Appended. Okay. So, if we look at the bestthingsEver.txt and we go to the end, there's no new text anywhere. Let's go ahead and run this code now. We appended, and if I go in here and go to the end of the file, there's no new text. Oh, there it is. Oh, sweet. Yeah, okay, well, it appends a line. So we learned that lesson today, too. It's going to append it as a new line into the file. Right? So this is how you can effectively take a file and keep writing to it over and over and over again. What else does it do? Well, let's just say we have a new file that we want to create. New file.txt. And we'll just say, this is my new file. Well, we're going to call append file. So append file writes to a file that already exists, but if you call it on a file that doesn't, it's kind enough to create it for you. I must have had a new, oh, there must have been a new line at the end of that other file. So it doesn't, I didn't think it did. It does not append a new line. It just appends to the file, but there must have been a new line at the end of the other one. Anyway, you can see I just called this over and over again, and the text keeps getting appended and appended. So what can we do to make this example a little bit fancier? Since we've seen read file, write file, now append file, and they're all very similar. What if we determine the file name from the command line? And we'll just call it file name. We can do the process.argv. And remember, we want to use argument 2, right? And what if we just want to take text as well? RV number 3. Now we should be able to create a new file and append text at will, right? Newest file. If I look at my other file, this is my newest file. I can go here and change it and call it on the new file. The other one, yeah. And here it is. This is my newest file. So as you can see, there's a lot we can do. We can even start building real applications that take in input and do stuff to our file system, right? So now we know about command line, we know about all kinds of file manipulation, and technically knowing what you know about file manipulation, there's a whole lot you can do on the system. Because the reality is most of the stuff on your computer is just a file at the end of the day. If you know how to manipulate it, you're good to go. So, any questions on the append file?
Yeah, weird question. Like,
Sure.
So if you made like a really big for loop and just appended that, would you like fill up your whole hard drive?
That's okay. Yes, technically yes.
Or like an infinite for loop or something?
If you made an infinite loop and just kept appending to a file, yes, you'd eventually fill up your hard drive. It would take a very, very long time, but you could most definitely do it. You could do it really fast if you wanted to, and you could have Node allocate a 10 gigabyte buffer and then just write that to a file and do that in an infinite loop and crash your computer if you really wanted to. I'm not sure what happens when your machine runs out of disk space. I'm not sure what Node does, but I'm assuming it just takes a dump and it's over. So I don't recommend doing it, but yes, most definitely you could crush your whole machine. Yeah. If we're in class and we're like, yeah, we just need you to append to a file, and then your machine catches on fire, that's on you, dude. That's not me. I did not tell you to do that. Cool. If have you guys been slacking out? Could you slack out the solution to this one? I know I didn't quite do it, but all right. So we're gonna go ahead and jump to a new activity. Let me pull it up in my terminal. So here's my terminal. Let me go to solve. This one's called bank.js. So this one is going to allow us to deposit money, withdraw money, view total, and play the lottery. Okay? So I could do node bank.js and type total, and it'll tell you how much money I have in my bank. Deposit, let's do 1011, deposited 1011. If I run total again, now I have 3892 instead of 2891. So let's do node bank.js with withdraw 100, node bank.js total. Now I am seriously void of money. And then there's another one, lotto, where you play the lotto and you have a chance of winning. You either pay 25 cents and lose, or You eventually win. Okay. This random number generator is not. I'm not good at this.
That's how I gamble.
Exactly right.
Yeah, I'm gonna add a $35 service charge.
Okay, well,
It's all on a credit card.
the lotto function is supposed to be a random number generator that lets you win eventually, but my luck's so bad that I just kept losing. So, right? Yours better than that. But anyway, that's going to be the gist of this assignment. So it's assignment number 15. I'll slack out the instructions for you. And yeah, we're actually going to spend about 30 minutes doing this. So work with your groups, work with your tables, kind of get this stuff all going. And yeah. Oh yeah, the bank information's in a file. I left that out. So you're gonna be writing and reading and appending. And...
So we're just gonna do a switch. We're gonna do
Switch for each particular transaction type.
So inside of those, there exists a file package. What's the kind of reference? So that later on, all things like. Transaction, processing, and then some of them require a second one for another.
yeah. That's just we're talking about making the bars, parameters of those boxes.
Right.
Oh, just make it like
where it takes like the second one or For the numbers? Yeah. They sent them.
Well, process.rb is what RB01 or something, so RB2 is the one that we have to
Yeah, the first two are the file. So sometimes. Oh, we have to do that. It's just.
I think that we're gonna have to like read and write back to that. Makes that next file.
Oh, just two. They want us, once I make this,
So basically, we want to make these commands from the command line, right? Basically, what I was thinking, I would do the same way too. So, if X is process.rb2 or whatever, so we have to make it so if you do total, it should tally up all the money in the bank. So if X is constant total, I guess, and then right now it's constant log. This should well, if I do that, node.js and then total, technically it's console.
I'm not I know. So, first thing we want to I like that, you can require it in the FS package, you get that many, that's file.
Don't worry, just you fulfill the same gap in my life as I live.
Or you just highlight it or whatever, and then whatever's highlighted will get the
Yeah, no, don't worry, like, I can tell you that now, I'll just be like, hey, just
yeah, somebody, I think Adam,
and don't worry about the project. You're like, so bullish.
yeah, it's like super useful.
So, what should we first do?
JavaScript.
If I do it again, it's gonna be undefined. So if I do node.base total, that's what I'm trying to get my type of
And then what is the exercise, whatever you want to call it. That's what it's good. Call something.
Or you can change the input.
What else makes sense? Whatever makes sense, I guess. It's more than just cause itself.
smell of desperation. No, that's scope.
Okay, well,
smell.
it's smell like burning.
That's right. I had to keep getting choking air.
In the switch statement, what
Oh
we're doing is
man, where's the
we're defining a switch statement by putting switch. So it's basically like it's going to do a good function, but it's a prefix. So switch is switch spells JavaScript.
That's a bad thing.
We're passing in a genre, right? So the genre, let's see it's a variable. So genre is basically whatever gets assigned to the genre, right? So any of these genres or
Always gonna be at most
so
total volume.
when I pass that keyword in to that function switch,
So let's start with the easiest one
when it
first.
says
I
case,
can
it's saying what is
You
assigned
gotta
to
show
genre,
what's in the
right?
file.
If func is genre,
So what are we,
then I want you to run the code right here. If not, then I want you to break
How
it
can
and run
we
it.
determine if bank action equals
Or
forward?
no, I'm sorry, not break. If the case is correct, if this genre, which is this case right here, then run this code, and then break. That means
If bank action equals what?
if the case does not match the order. So basically it takes genre,
Bank
applies
action
it,
equals total.
it tests it against each one of these, and says,
Saying if the total.
is it this? No. Is it this? No. Is it this? No. Then it moves on to the
So all the vocabulary in the file is you're adding numbers to it. So they're adding a character. That doesn't, I mean, tell, you need to make them make every point. Positive, negative.
It's only going to recognize these three. If it's not one of these three, if it's not one of these three, then it's going to do it. The default is for key and then it's log a plus key, then it's plus key. So basically, it's going to run this code if it doesn't recognize one of these three. Right. But this switch statement could be 100. So. Which I don't really know why they use this switch statement in this case.
So this right here is the M file line. I'll put back in this is M file. Here is one of the M file.
Oh no, there is a reason why they use this switch case. This is where the genre changes. Right, so if you're accessing bandwidth at genre.
We know that bank has.
You know, start singing Starship.
Why would this bank use? So it's now they're separate by commas.
Well, this 6 years
Split by comma. So then turn those into numbers. And add them together.
What about those,
First thing you should do is have these other five. One example is just
yeah, it's not. But I'd say, I mean, honestly, I think maybe what we do is start at the beginning and just go through it, because if you're not fully understanding what's going on inside of this, it means that you've missed comprehension of something. Right? And the thing that I like about Codecademy is that Codecademy is very step by step. And it starts at the very beginning and it works your way. Right? So like, I think that if you go back and start to reinforce this concept, you have forget jQuery, forget HTML, forget CSS. HTML, CSS, and jQuery are super easy once you figure it out. And JavaScript is going to be way more important to you right now than any of those other technologies. Right? So what I would say is, I would focus your time. Right. Go back to the beginning of that tutorial. Try to figure out each part of it, right? One by one by one. And try to memorize everything that it says on it, right? If you get 5 or 6 slides in, or 5 or 6 like columns in, right? Sections in on Codecademy, and you're like, well, I can't remember what this is. Start over. As much as it sucks to start over, repetition is how we learn, and I think that's where we're struggling right now. You have an idea, like broad idea, what you're missing this, you're missing that, you're missing this, you're missing that. So when you're missing those things, you go to do the work, and you don't really understand how passing genre makes sense. So where's genre coming from? How is genre? It's just those kind of things.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Is what's slowing the progress. So I think that getting that repetition using Pro Academy, because a lot of these that we're giving you right now, these are going to be more advanced in your skill set, and it's asking you to solve these problems, right? But I think that during class you should be investing in problems, but outside of class you should switch. Two things. One, two, because that's where you're going to make there is a Node.js, there are a lot of Node.js training programs for you to do, but I would say the Node.js is moving slow enough right now that if you just focus on JavaScript, and by the end of the week, if you're doing a lot better at JavaScript,
When it comes along to the portal, it just brings up everything in that.
I think that you should just focus your time on JavaScript. Because that's where you're going to have the most improvement. It's just
I had it
really
outside
learning
of
the
it,
basics of JavaScript.
then I put it inside of that read file.
You can call it
My portal, console, your portal is data.
Yeah. Well, when you hit those walls, yeah, that's actually what I used to do. When I would hit a wall, I would just go start over. And that's where I was learning Golang, which is based on C. I remember that as C. So I started learning Golang, and I got this full tutorial, and it's like a 3-hour tutorial. And I'd get through it, and I would hit a wall, and I'm like, what's going on here? And I'd be like, what does this mean? What's this mean? And then I think to myself, I know what they defined these before. So my decision was, I'm going to start over. So I started over from the beginning, went through it again, and I got a little further. And I started over from the beginning, and went through it again, and I got a little further. And I still haven't fully finished it. There's only one section I haven't finished. But if I continue to gain that comprehension by just repeating it over and over again, I know that that same thing will happen. We have a very similar problem. So
if statement.
I think that repetition.
Okay, so you did kind of make it a switch case, and then within the switch case, if
That's how they work.
Well, jQuery is kind of an extension of JavaScript. HTML and CSS, they are so simple that like, if all you did for the rest of the time you were here was learn JavaScript, when you left, you could learn HTML and CSS. So I would say let's focus all of your time on learning JavaScript and learning current curriculum you're doing right now. So I think that's probably
What is that? That progress about that?
that's what I would do. I mean, honestly, like, yeah, I would say start over. Because what's going to happen is, you're going to be going through Code Academy. You'll just have to figure out time. When I redo something, I'll be going through and I'll be like, this is a point that I was stuck on before, and then out of nowhere I had a time. I'm like, man, I was so stupid, because this was so easy. But I figured it out now.
Figure out how to
add
all the
it just takes
numbers
some time
from
to
that file.
really
I just can figure out the
delve in and
efficient way to
soak
do
up
it.
that JavaScript. Because I will tell you that Code Academy has all the basics you need to get to the point where you can do this.
So we have to.
Without
Pretty much just copy and paste it.
write a lot of stuff out, a lot of stuff.
So go back to.
Write it out.
Well, what I would say, I would say sometimes that might actually be progress, because I understand that like it's really important to have a broad understanding of everything, but I think that right now also for reasons, right? It's not always important to understand how things interact with each other. It's important to understand what this does, right? What is this one little? We're trying to figure out how do I write a code. Do you have the full syntax memorized? how to write it. Yeah, that's see, it's those kind of things, like, that's what we should be sort of memorizing, because it took me, like, it took me like 3 months to memorize some loop syntax, and once I did, every time I needed to do a for loop before, it was just like, wow, this is really easy, right? So it's not just the for loop syntax, it's all of it, right? It's like, what are the different syntaxes for a function? Right, and what are the different syntaxes for full-time variable? Well, see all those things, yeah, function syntax, you know, variable syntax.
Hanging out, and then like Great Sam Elliott rolls in, he's not the carrot.
And so all those things
How would I not do
using
that? When I smoke cigarettes, I would like to.
maybe that would be what I would say right now, kind of where you're at.
Yes.
Because forget all the rest of the stuff.
Watch
JavaScript is going to be very hard, especially because we're going to and the thing about Node.js is that Node.js does not use HTML.
I'm gonna watch that.
Kind of thinking that maybe
So it's going to be purely, this is purely services. So what's going to happen is, what you were doing before was you built a user interface. And that user interface would make calls to a backend, and that backend would return objects. Well, now what's happening is we're building a backend, and the backend is accepting calls and returning objects, right? And it also might store into the database, right? So the server handles requests. And so a request comes in from a client, which is something we built before. We're not building that now. What we're building is the server that receives the request, and then our backend does something with that request, either puts it in a database, or grabs data from the database, or deletes data out of the database, or it authenticates something, or you know, it sends a request out or whatever it is, right? But it's all the server handles the request, and then it does all the backend work, right? And that is purely JavaScript. It's not going to be so JavaScript is the only thing we're not doing. So that's why I think that focusing on that academy is going to give you the underpinnings of what we need to do to get this done. And then I also think that just once you really program JavaScript, it also comes down to logic. How many characters, right? So like this is kind of a hard assignment. You know, so like, how do I build out the code that does this? Well, you're obviously going to use JavaScript, but then it comes down to like, remember pseudocoding, saying, I need a function that does this, I need a function that does that, I need a function that does that. And then once you pseudocode it, then you start to write it out on your screen, and then you start to add the functionality to those functions, and then you figure out where to call that function. One of those methods. And right now, JavaScript will do the and then keeping up with all the responsible. Because the more you learn JavaScript.
So now I need to focus. So now that I have this part,
So you have that case, and then mark it something. The other thing is too, I'd suggest try to work in 15 minutes of volume. At least, if you're not going to become pro, it's better to want to practice, you know, as kind of want to, you know, and just kind of do the best you can to understand what you're doing, right? Because one of the things that helped me learn a lot was being like stories are I code is what's in the right? So I code along with what they're doing, then I will learn a lot faster because if I don't have a clear mental picture of what to do, but someone else does, and they do it, now I have a clear mental picture of what they've done. And I'm like, oh, okay, now it's the instructions. I just need to do the work.
Like, it's not just like fucking
So sometimes it's good to work like straight out, like, if you're not like actively interested in what you're doing, just be like, hey, do you mind if we do this? And have an operation. Like, yeah. I mean, you can have two visual so you can literally see that you got two open right now. So I can go over here, scroll to the top, and I can literally. So I can fill in this one while I'm watching. See what I'm Oh, yeah.
Don't change it now, keep doing what you're doing, but if you're doing this,
Can you
So I just made function at the top, the switch file.
well, that's gonna kind of slow down the progress.
Okay, so
I wonder if there's a way to split the screen on Windows PC. Because you can also split your screen. And that's one thing that I found is that when you split your screen, well,
I don't think JavaScript matters.
you're gonna be stopping the video a lot.
And the total function is just.
That's why it's better to type it out. I can type it out. I can do it. Yeah.
This says reshow file.
It just makes it more readable.
If the number has a negative in front of it, it's subtracted from the whole.
Again, from that,
No, I tried a couple of different things.
well, if you get tired of it, don't get so like raw in your stop. Don't push yourself to the wall.
I haven't done it right now. I'm still trying to read it. Still trying to read the problem.
Yeah, I was like second parameter.
Look at what's on the plot. Go to the base text. Notice that each one is common to one of them. Right? So, you want to put.
Yeah, it was set up like, I know it's set up as that would get like a number, but partially float, so we got decibels. Customer service
So now, based Well, we're doing two different things here, so the command is actually responding to not even to the point yet where you process what the command is.
Right, yeah, I was a little bit. Yes.
That's okay, so just do me a favor, comment out that refile line, just want to.
Puzzling, I'm not doing puzzling.
You're depositing. So,
Okay.
you have to figure out, listen first. If you want to get out, so then you have to
Yeah.
run the code.
I found part of the solution. I was trying to do some of it, but I found the rest of it. So that is just be for most of it. I just said,
And remember, you also have to put your points. For now, so what I
I
would do
understand what's
is
going on here for the most part. I just couldn't like write it.
This right here. Pretty much the same thing. Input to minus parentheses on the text.
Yeah, so I think it's like, because I guess every time that you run that, result will
Okay.
and then result plus equals all the extra.
Let's go over this one together. Fist of 5, how'd we do on this one? Getting there. Some people did well. It was a struggle. This one was tough, wasn't it? There was a lot to this, because not only now do we have to figure out how we're using Node, we had to use command line parameters, several of them, and varying lengths of command line parameters based off the command. We had to use read file, append file, you could use write file, a whole bunch of stuff. So, let's take a look at the code. So first things first, when you're when you know you're going to use a package, the first thing you should do is import that package or require that package at the top of the file. Okay? So we already know that we have bank.txt and we're going to need to read that file and append that file and write that file, right? So we might as well just get the FS module, load it in, and get it ready to be used. So the first thing you should have, var fs equals require fs. Now, like I said, it's best practice to do those at the top of the file just so it's easy to find all of the packages that exist in the file. Do you need to? No, you don't need to, but I highly recommend you get in the habit of doing it first. First things first, have your requires, nothing else. So we have two potential arguments for this one, right? We have the action, the bank action, the action, whatever you want to call it, the thing that the user wants to do. It's going to be total, lotto, deposit, withdraw. And then for some of them, there's going to be a second parameter as well, which is going to be the amount that they want to associate with that action. So for instance, I want to deposit $15.50, right? Or some weird number like that. That's what the second parameter would be. And again, we always start on index 2 and index 3, the third and the fourth item in the process argv array, because the first one is node and the second one is your script. Don't forget that. I'm sure by now you won't. You're probably all tired of me saying it, but either way. So we've got our action right here. Pulled it from the command line. We've got our amount that we're going to use. Now, again, amount is going to be blank half the time because there's two commands that don't use it at all. So we're going to have to be wary of that. So the very next thing we need to do after we have the action is we need to figure out what we're going to do. Okay? And there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can do it with a switch statement like they have here. You can do it with an else or an if, an else if, else kind of statement. Right? If action equals if action total, do something, else if action equals deposit, right? That is not how you spell deposit. Right, so, geez. functionally equivalent, the LSIF and the switch. So whatever one you chose is, as long as it works, it's good. Okay, so let's break down the total first, because the total is probably the simplest one we have, right? Because all we really have to do is take that file. We need to get all of the, all the contents of the file. If we look at the bank.txt file, it's just a comma-separated list of values, of numbers, right? So when you read the content of that file, we need to split by comma. Since it's comma-separated, we need to turn them into numbers. We need to add them all up and then console log to the user. So, fs.read file, that's how we read a file, right? The first parameter is the file name. The second parameter is the encoding. The third is the function. Error and the data. If there's an error, we're done. We're done. First things first, we should always check that. After that, we know we need to split by comma. If you want to be like Rolando and be particular, you can split by comma in space, or you could trim. And then we need to get ready for our results, right? So it's good, just prepare our variable right now that we're going to store everything in. Set it equal to 0. We know it's going to be a number. Nice and simple. Then we need to do the dirty work, right? We need to go ahead and loop through this array of values. So we have our data that we set equal to the array, and we're just going to go through the length, right? To the length, because it's an array. We want to go to the last element. So parse float. There's parse int, there's number, there's parse float. The one we wanted here was parse float y. We wanted decimal points, right? So this is an interesting clause here. Did anyone else have this? If parse float, then parse float? Yeah? Why do we do this?
Is that just checking if it's a number or not?
Yeah, exactly. So if parse float returns nan, not a number, it's going to evaluate to false. And then you won't be adding a random value to your result, which will end up in bad things, probably nan at the end of the day, which isn't really a number. And when the user goes to do their total and their ATM and they get nan, they're not going to be very happy. I know I wouldn't be. So anyway, we know right here that this value I in the array is going to be a number, so we can add it to our result, right, with the plus equals. Once we're done, we can just go ahead and log you have a total of, and then the result. So there's this extension on numbers, this function called toFixed, where you can pass in how many decimal places you want to print. It's just nice because numbers are generally 2 decimal, or money is generally 2 decimal places, right? At least in the consumer world. So this is nice for printing purposes. Okay, so we printed our total, all well and good. What next? We want to look at the deposit. How do we deposit? Well, we're going to have to take the value that they give us, and we're going to have to add it to that file. So all we can really do, make it nice and simple, is append to the file. We're going to go ahead and append a comma and a space in the new value they gave us, and call it good. If there's no error, then great, we're good, and we'll just be like, hey, we deposited. Now, this could be done better, because we could have this console log print after we already know that there is no error, because if there's an error there, it's going to console log, but we're going to get false hope that something was deposited into our account. So I would actually think that this, in my opinion, would be better right there. So withdraw, it's going to be similar, but with withdraw, we're just going to append a negative sign in front of the value. Parse float's smart enough to know if it's got a negative sign, it's going to go ahead and be a negative number. So if we do withdraw, it's effectively taking out from an account, so you could just add a negative number, and voila, we have a withdrawal. Very similar to deposit. And again, they have this here, which I don't like. That's stupid. Don't do that. Alright, last, the lotto. Before we move on to lotto, anyone have any questions on anything we've seen so far? How we're using read file? Yeah, Jaime?
My question is, why do you recommend moving the last console on
Why do I recommend moving this here into the append file function? Because I do not want it to say it withdrew money unless it actually did, and I can't guarantee that until I've checked to see if there's an error in the append file operation. So I don't want the user to think that something was withdrawn and then they see this crazy text that says there's an error, right? Granted, this isn't a real application. It's just a little experiment, but still, for user validation and user experience purposes, it's better that we don't give them any false sense of hope. Because it'll be confusing. Even if you see the error after that withdrew, you're still going to be like, well, did it withdraw and then something bad happened? Or what happened, you know? But if we never say that we withdrew anything, they're never going to think that happened. I don't think there's a problem.
So even the return won't stop the rest of the function?
This return will stop the rest of this function, but it won't stop what's happening outside of it. Yeah, because this function right here is inside, is a callback. So a return only works on the function it's directly nested in. Any other questions? We've got the append file and the read file. Cool. So the lotto is a little different. First thing first, we are going to deduct 25 cents from their account because they got to play lottery. You got to buy a lottery ticket, right? So we're just going to go ahead and do the append file deduction thing that we're doing and deduct from the account. Now, this is another example, and I'll explain it in a little bit, of why it'd be better to have all of this logic happening in this function, but it's okay. We can just assume that the money was taken out and no one got a free lottery ticket. So we're going to go ahead and grab a random chance, determine a random number to see if the person wins or loses. If the chance is equal to 1, then they go ahead and win. We'll just go ahead and append $2 into their account, and you're up $1.75. However, if it's anything else, you suck and you should get a job instead of playing the lottery. Any questions on this? Yeah, Matt?
So at the top, we made case breaks, and those are calling the logic down below the functions?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So this is a good one to start using your functions because we want to isolate the code to a very specific case, right? And it's just much cleaner when it's in its own scope with a function and everything. Any questions on this before we move on? Cool. The TAs will Slack out the solution for you, so you can take a look at that a little later. We're going to move on to something else that's similar. We're going to start making HTTP requests in Node. So I'll open up this code right here. If I look at this, I have this code right here. It's not doing anything crazy, but it calls this request function, which calls it to Wikipedia. It's just literally, this is just a Wikipedia article on the granola bar. Nothing fancy. And it has a callback with 3 parameters: error, response, and body. So let's see what it does. It explodes. Bummer. Why does it explode? Well, let's see. Request is not defined. That function request that I'm calling does not exist. It's not a built-in function to JavaScript. It's not a built-in function to Node. So if you want to call a legitimate version of request, you have to require the package. Very similar to FS. So this one should work. But it doesn't. Yet again. Cannot find module request. Okay, so this is different. So before with FS, when we required it, it just worked. Magically just worked. But now this is saying, I can't find request. I have no idea what you're talking about. So in the Node ecosystem, there's something called NPM. And NPM is called the Node Package Manager. It's installed with Node. So you all have it on your machine. And to verify that, you can do NPM version, and you'll get some number. Right? Well, NPM allows you to download third-party code in these packages, right? These Node modules, and use it. Request happens to be one of those. So there's a couple of artifacts you can look for to know that you're in a package that requires NPM, and here's one. Every Node application has this package JSON, and the package JSON will in it list dependencies. In this case, it has a dependency on request at a certain version. When you see this, and you don't see something else, you don't see a Node modules folder, you know your packages aren't installed. So if I run npm install, what it's going to do, it's going to go ahead and read that package JSON. It's going to go out there, it's going to find all the dependencies. In this case, it's just request. It's going to install them in this Node modules folder. This Node modules folder is in the same root as my package JSON for that particular project. And in there, we'll eventually find request, and all of these other things are all of the dependencies request has. It's pretty crazy. And here's the code, the actual code for request.js if we wanted to look at it. But when Jaime was asking earlier, where does the FS live? FS is a system module that's installed with Node, so it lives in the ether wherever Node puts it on installation. However, third-party code that you install with npm lives in this Node modules folder. So there's effectively a global Node module somewhere out there for the built-in stuff that we don't really see. Anyway, it's installed. Now, if I go ahead and run this, nice. I get a big HTML payload. Because that's exactly what that is. I'm making a literal request to Wikipedia, just like if you were in your browser. And for instance, if I just copy this, because this makes a GET request, and I just open Chrome, this is what I got just now in my terminal. All of this HTML. It's not very helpful in a terminal, but it's there. Alright, so a couple of important points about that right there. One, there are third-party packages that do not exist on our system. Two, we have a package JSON that specifies these modules and packages that we want to use. Three, you have to install them with npm install. If you ever get those errors, this module cannot be found. Right, I'll show you. I'll just rmrf my node modules. Right? And I do node request again. If I ever get this crazy error, cannot find module request. It could be any module, right? Any module you're using that's not a system module. You know the next thing you gotta do is run npm install. When I run it again, boom, we're good. Any questions on the npm process? How that works. You'll get more familiar with it, especially on Wednesday. We're going to do a lot with it. Yeah, Peyton?
So do you have to have those package JSON files before you can install the npm?
Yes.
How do you get those?
The package JSON, if you want to create a package JSON in like a new directory or something, say you want to initialize a new package, I'll go back to this missing package. You can do npm init. Run through the prompts. They're not super important. And it'll create a package JSON. And then from there, you can tell it you want to install new dependencies and stuff and update that package JSON. We'll get into that more later. But for now, just know if you see it, which we'll see it in some of these exercises, you have to run npm install first. You have to do that, or this code just won't work. Any other questions on npm? Cool. So let's look at this request function now. Now that we have it installed, now that it works, what does it do? Well, it's thankfully very similar to a read file, except for it doesn't read a file, it reads a web page. That's basically what it does. You give it a URL, which is very similar to your file path. Thankfully, we don't have to give it an encoding or anything like that, but you could. I don't know if this function explicitly takes it, but you can definitely do that. And then we have a callback. Just like with, read file and write file and append file, the first parameter is error. ERR, error, whatever. It's always an error, right? And node best practice, the first parameter of a callback should be an error. If it exists, you're done. We're out of here. The next one, similar to our AJAX calls and jQuery, is a response. This response has all kinds of information about what we got back. Status codes, headers, where it came from, all kinds of stuff that you may or may not want. We'll want some of it, but not all of it usually. And then the third one, this one has 3 actually, which is pretty unusual. This one's the body, and in this case it's an HTML payload. So if it was JSON, we'd get a JSON payload, but it's just an HTML payload, so we'll get a bunch of HTML text. So we're in this function. We can check if there's no error. So this one's a little different than what we've seen. Now this says if not error, right? Because the exclamation point means not. What does that mean? Before we were checking if error. Now we're saying if not error. Anyone have a guess? Matt?
So if there's not an error, it will give us a response, but if there is an error, it won't give us a response. That's kind of like the best way.
Yeah, that's pretty close. So what does it mean by not error, though? Like, what explicitly is it testing?
If there's an error or not?
Well, it's truthiness, right? So if that evaluates to false, then what does that mean? It means it's undefined or null. That's the important thing to remember. If error is undefined or null, what it's saying is if there isn't an error. So if it's undefined or null, and the response has a status code of 200, I will console log the body. Otherwise, I probably don't have something I want. So will it still give you the response? Yeah, it'll still give you a response. If there's an error, probably not, because something bad happened. But you could get a response with a different status code altogether, like a 400 or 404. We've seen those before with our AJAX calls, right? 404s, 401s, you know, not authenticated, stuff like that. If you got a 404, your body's not going to be HTML. It might be, and it might just say, this page does not exist, right? Something not very useful. So 200 status code means okay, A-OK. It's exactly what it means. Literally, it's 200 okay. When we get that, we know we're good to go, and the payload we got back is exactly what we would get if we went to it in our browser. And so we'll console log it. That's why we have the 2 checks there. Any questions on this code with request? Cool. Well, we're going to look at an API we're pretty familiar with this request stuff. All right. Remember that OMDB API? Well, we can call it from Node, actually. So you'll notice that there was a package JSON in this. And again, we have this request. So if I were to run this code, anyone guess what's going to happen? It explodes. So what's the first thing I got to run? npm install. Let's go ahead and run it again. We got a movie's rating. Nice, that's pretty cool. Now we're doing it from Node instead of jQuery. So a couple of things you may realize, at least that I feel like, this is a lot more sane looking. There's not a bunch of crazy symbols and stuff like jQuery. And it works almost exactly the same, right? It has a response. You don't call it with the .then, but it's similar because it has the callback. Anyway, let's take a look at it. Again, we have a request module, right? We require a request. Request is literally a function. So this one is also different. Normally our requires up until this point, like with FS and all the stuff we've done, have been objects. FS had functions on it. fs.read file, fs.write file, fs.append file. This one is literally a function. So when we call require, we just get a function back. Now someone's probably going to ask, how do you know if what you're requiring is a function or an object or just a value? And the answer is you look at the documentation for the package. Or you console log whatever the hell it is you get back. If I go ahead and run a console.log on request, I get this. And right here, it says it's a function. Very first thing. Now, we haven't gotten into it yet, but functions can have properties like objects. That's an aside. It's a function. So you can do it that way, or you can look at the documentation for request. Now usually when I want to look up the documentation for a package, I'll go ahead and open the browser, request JS npm, something like that. Here you go, request on npm. You can go to this page, it tells you about it, how it works. You can either look here or you can go to GitHub and actually see the code. Right, so this is the repo on GitHub. You can see how it's used. So this is like our Node API docs, but you're at the mercy of the open source contributors, so you could get something pretty terrible. Request is pretty widely used though in quite a few projects, so it's got good docs. Anyway, this one is slightly different because we're getting a JSON object back, and then we're using that JSON object to then print a property of it. So if we don't care about the rating, you'll see we're going to get a nice object. Sweet. It didn't like that. I don't think it likes adding them. Let's go ahead and just try to print just the JSON object. Let's see what this response looks like. Alright, there we go. So, this is what we're actually getting back from OMDB API. Very similar to what we saw with the jQuery stuff, right? Now we can see it in our console. See our ratings. You see the website, all kinds of stuff that we were using there. And if you needed to see what the object looked like while you're working, this is how you could do it. Console log it out, right? So remember the OMDB API URL. It was to omdbapi.com, and then we have our query parameters. We have the title, the year, the plot, and then we have our Trilogy API key. And then we have our callback function, error, response, and body. If we don't have an error and the response is A-OK, we can console log this. Anyone have any questions on this request, OMDB API, using a request, installing packages, any of the stuff we just talked about? And it was kind of a lot. And go over installing packages again?
Yeah.
From what point?
So if you don't have the JSON package.
If you don't have package JSON,
Right.
don't worry about that right now. Because you're not going to be adding them yourself. Just know that if you come in here, you open this in code, and there's no node modules folder, but there is a package JSON file. First thing you do is run npm install.
Okay.
Don't worry about creating a package yourself. I think we do that Wednesday. Just focus on knowing that you got to install stuff. Any other questions? Cool. Activity 18 is what we're going to do. You're going to be using OMDB API to interrogate it for information about movies. Remember the API key is Trilogy. And I would work with a group on this one too. Yes, this is 18.
We're still gonna have to install request,
You can go ahead and try to run without it, but you're most likely going to have to install request.
but it doesn't have the JSON package.
It doesn't have package JSON?
Right, yeah, that's why, like, the demo didn't have it either, and I was wondering if I missed it. Over or not.
But you can install request without the JSON package?
No. Okay. Alright. We'll walk through that together.
Like, if you do npm install, it'll give you the package block JSON, and then you have to figure out how to.
Yeah, that's not what you want to do. So we have this code, right? This is where you guys are starting. We go into here. And we know we're going to need request. npm init. Initializes a new package. Okay? Don't worry about this stuff. Literally, it's not important. Not right now. Now we have our package JSON. Now what do we need? We need request. npm install request. Now, this may not update. Okay, it did. Good. So once we've done the npm install for the first time, now our package.json also has the request dependency and request exists. So that's the true flow. We need to add it. Package.json, we do npm init, and then you'll do npm install and your package name. And you're good to go with all your packages. You should have your node modules, should have your packages installed. There's our node modules, all this stuff's in there. Package lock's updated, package.json's updated. There's a request.
We're project one.
Oh, yeah.
It would have probably migrated at least.
Yeah. Yeah.
Package lock?
Yeah.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Oh, okay.
It comes with the npm install.
Alright.
Yeah, the package lock JSON is an artifact from the npm install. Just keep it. Don't get rid of it. It'll always come back. Saturday, we're going over. We're going over MySQL. it's going to be a harder one to pick up on your own. Because this is going to be the final day of Node. So the stuff we've gone over today could get you through Wednesday's class. Saturday is going to be, I think, a totally new topic. So let me look. Oh, Saturday is constructors and callbacks. It's JavaScript. It's JavaScript. So, kind of your call. Depends on how comfortable you're feeling with JavaScript. If you feel like you're a 5 out of 5, you're ready to go, you could probably miss it and be okay. But you might have some confusion with constructors because they're pretty tricky in JavaScript. So, it's kind of up to you.
No, absolutely not. I did them all today. I'm just
I don't think it matters. I think we just need mostly just like that bar request and then just a request function.
Yeah, start with easy design and then try to make it more simple. Yeah, it's
I think request has to be in code.
Oh, what's
No, so just the variable, since the variable already
There is actually, so request is a node package.
What is every response?
Linux is PHP is the one that was used for a long time. Before that, it was probably
There's also a way you can do it. But basically, it's just
very heavily in the gaming industry and like
you made your own little JSON out of it?
Yeah, I was just reading it off.
Oh, harder it allows.
we're gonna do a lot of it, and then we're gonna mix the two again.
So when do we get to Angular?
We don't do Angular this class program. Why you know someone who's Angular or something?
Yeah. No, just
So basically, you know the address folder we made?
So we're doing a what I would do is console log out just as punch body first, and look at it. And then you can tell what's the actual content.
Writing a node web server is nowhere near the same.
Alright. There could be like a section, I was wondering why, but
Really, I'm not
basically,
Carson, we're doing wrong Dynamic Express.
so the console log, the console log, basically,
back end of lock and then like
body
bars,
not everything inside here.
Yeah.
So I was thinking like, how do you pull like the year 2015?
So the release is
So if you do like body dot year, then determine if it's not a normal object. Undefined. So then, I guess we have to use like
giving up on this.
you do kind of that function terms discrete based on things in a normal object, so then you can do that dot year after that.
There's a lot of like, I have to know things, how can I appropriately like, yeah, but with, so it's like, oh, I can use it. Oh, this is like the, how you like, calculate the,
It gives you a really good rundown and like.
This one pretty much just is an object, except you can like substantially different, so it has quotes that are
I found that was like the best way.
my kid brother does.
Basic foundation for it.
Yeah, like I said, I told this.
There's a lot of libraries around the analytics.
Yeah, I'm trying to
Python stack and things are like
Yeah.
learn, but outside
I actually like reading the books.
so people who are like, I'm a data scientist or I am an engineer or something, like they don't do code, they'll generally go to these Python libraries. And it just has gained an interest. Also, CS programs used to teach things in C and C++. So they decided that's too hard, so they started using Python. So a lot of people put on CS Python experience now. That's really, all these CS teachers coming in with Python. And there's debates.
But yeah, I like to have them because I really
It's just not so much job. I haven't like really read through that yet.
Never seen a dictator with code base success to do it against
Well, Linus retired. He's going to get psychiatric help.
He makes like $2 million a year maintaining the Linux kernel.
I know.
I thought it was all open source. I don't think we made money from it.
No, he does. The Linux Foundation pays him $1 million base salary with like $1 million
And
Nice.
IBM, Oracle, Intel, actually the ones that contribute the money to that foundation that pay his salary.
Yeah, that's public record. It's based in Finland where he lives in public record.
But he did announce on his list that he was going to take that step aside for a little while because people were complaining about his aggressive behavior.
Oh yeah, he'll be back though. He's not retiring. He's just.
You can't take the man out of his Linus habitat.
Yeah, exactly.
They'll come back out every 100 years.
How did you get big goals?
How did we?
I did actually.
Yeah, you know what I don't know.
I graduated from high school as a because according to them, I was always good.
Weren't those the easy days?
Yeah. Use a cassette tape, actually. I'm not as old as flashcards though, though I know what they do.
These stations and like working with cubicles and this so that they just go and they set it up and it just comes like in high school and shit. They just do it.
Yeah, you really do what you do. I remember this was back in
White coats, you know, like lab coat, walk around. So the professors like
yeah, you want this thing popping in there. She records music over it. And so he went to with the rhythm set player for
if you ever take a
recorded music off the radio.
like closet
You don't put it out. My mom's Mexican. Oh, shit. Because I didn't listen to what she was doing. You sit there, you're in your head, you're talking.
Does that make sense though? Remember, at the very top of the file, you
Can't do that. Now you're going. You're the wrong way.
So they basically wrote JavaScript to make their request really cool. So you would like to work there. And then if we're in order to use it, you have to require it. But when you use it, it makes it really.
Oh, hold on. Do you want me to? You can totally work out of your form. I'm trying to read it a little bit.
It makes it really simple.
No, that's the one I got me 90. Yeah, that one counts.
Oh, this is the dark power. I'll go into this.
Just a little bit of that, like, you know. Thanks. Basically, got a rejection letter for the front end development position. Like, they basically say these 3 reasons are why. One, core alignment, motivation, and commitment to our core values. That's core shit. Technical ability, core values.
Well, in the day, yeah, I was there are opportunities in a specific position or literally communicating.
What is your resume look like? Brand? I like jobs. Jobs are fun. Experience from now and right. More motivated. Your resume is controlling algorithm.
All right, we'll go over this in like another minute.
So if you're on like somebody else's computer, you go to the command prompt, and then you could check if they have the node on it by going like that. So I have node over 2.8 or whatever. Just say I wrote just a JavaScript file on my computer, just something like this. Technically, I feel like I should be able to see that. I wouldn't need a Visual Studio for it. You know, go to Notepad and then see
All right, let's go over this one and then call it a day.
I don't know. I just feel like if I did like one of those like write files or whatever, or like the system 32 or something like that. So that's like a node, right? Which sucks is then if I had access to the command prompt, then all the way to that's what the right syntax of the right file. That right file.
All right, I'm gonna start going over it. Okay, so we have our package here. We have the package JSON with the package lock JSON. First things first, nothing's going to work if we don't run npm install. We know that because we have our package JSON and we have no node modules folder. So we might as well run it and see what happens. And lucky for us, it installed some stuff. Cool, so let's look at the first solution. So basically what we wanted to do was take a movie name from the command line. This one is just a single word movie name. And we want to use that to call OMDB API and get information about that movie, right? So we're going to pull the movie name off of the command line with the process argv. And then we're going to go ahead and build that query URL with the movie name, okay? So that's just like we did with jQuery, where you have the T equals and the title, which is our movie name, and then all the other stuff with the API key and the plot and the year specified in the query string. Then you can go ahead and send that on out to request, right? And you'll get that crazy callback with the error, response, and body. From here, you want to do some parsing to determine that the response status code is at least is 200, right? You don't want it to be anything else, and that there's not an error. Because if there's an error, something bad happened. Excuse me. And your JSON parse will just fail miserably because there won't be anything to parse, or at least probably not a JSON object. So if we run through this, node level 1, we'll do level 1, and we'll do JAWS. Release year 1975. Any questions on this solution and how it works? So the more complicated solution allows you to do any number of words in the title of the movie. So this one is pretty clever. What it does is takes that argv, right, the arguments that we're passing into the command line, and stores it in another variable so we can use it. Creates a movie name, sets it to blank, and then it loops through the node args. So first of all, we know that we have to start at index 2, right? The first one is node, the second one is the script, and the third one, index 2, is the start of our movie name. So we'll go ahead and start there, and we'll loop through the length of the arguments, the node args, right? So this first check is basically saying if I is greater than 2, so for after that index 2, after the first word in the movie title, and I still less than the length of the array, okay, so we're not past the array, then we can go ahead and add a plus between the words, right? So we have a movie name that already exists, and we can add a plus. And then we can add the next movie in the array, or the next part of the title in the array. Otherwise, if it's index number 2, so it's that first word in the movie title, we're just going to go ahead and add it to movie name, because that's going to be that first word, so you don't need to append a plus in front of it. Then what it'll do is the same thing as that last solution. It'll append the movie name into the OpenDB API URL, console log that for us, and then send us the year, right? So let's see how it works really quick. Let's do $1 Million Baby. That was a good movie. 2004. Worked great. Let's go ahead and add some console logs so we can see what exactly is going on. So let's do a console log here, and we'll do node args I, right? So why don't we see what is going on, with what argument's going to be appended, and then we'll just console log. This is the first argument. We'll say word. And then right here, let's console log. This is the next word. Let's run it again and see what we see. Okay. So we walk through, we have the node args array. We're starting at index 2. So index 2 is million. And then right here, you can see because index is not greater than 2, immediately we know index is not greater than 2. We're going to go ahead and console log. This is the first word. So million is the first word. We increment I is now 3. 3 is greater than 2, and 3 is less than the array length, which is like 5 or 6, 5 at this point. So this is the next word, which is $, and we go through and do it again. Baby is the third word, and then we append them all together, and we have our final URI right here. Million plus $+ plus baby. Sends out the request. We get a response back, and we can see the year. Any questions on this version of the solution? We'll slack these solutions out for you so you can take a look at them. Got you, Michael. I got you. Any questions on any of the stuff we covered today? Any of the node stuff? Read file, write file, append file, packages, any of that stuff. Alright, go away. I don't want to see you anymore.